What's up, everybody? I'm Jude. That's a hat. Just kidding. It's Ethan. And if you would like to check out any of these beautiful hats that we have on, this is a perfect time to go check out our shop, sspn.myspreadshop.com. Before we get into today's episode, Ethan, I like what you did there, how you covered the screen and it was just the SSPN logo. Like obviously they know it's you, but I like the little quirkiness there. But we just had a ton of people that have joined the channel. I think we've had over like 50 subs in like the last 4 days or so
Yeah.
from y'all's support on the recent Spurs draft prospects breakdown clip that we did. So I want to start off by just saying shout out to all of you guys for the support in the comments, hitting the like button. You also got that stream up to over 1,000 views. And then the lottery odds breakdown clip as well after the views went up on the Spurs draft prospects clip, that ended up going up to 1,000 views. So we just want to start out by saying thank you, SSPN family. We appreciate you very much, and we are just as excited for this off-season content as you guys.
I think if I were to add anything other than the two words thank you, I would be doing you an injustice, Jude, for how beautifully you put that. So thank you, everyone.
I appreciate it, Ethan. But we have some more off-season stuff to talk about today. And last week on Twitter, I forget their name, but shout out to you. We got a suggestion to break down or go over Wemby's recent interview with Kevin O'Connor, where he went over just the entirety of his rookie season. And for those of you guys who don't know, Kevin O'Connor, he was the guy who made the big board in the mock draft. He's also just that we did in last episode. He works for The Ringer. He's one of their main NBA guys. He also hosts their podcast, writes stories throughout the year. He's not just a draft guy. He's just a total NBA head, if you will, when it comes to the working at The Ringer. But he just did about a 50-minute interview with Victor Wembanyama that was very, very introspective and very revealing, I would say. He definitely asked him like some straight up questions. Like within like the first 15 minutes of the interview, he's asking Victor, like, do you think you're defensive player of the year? Do you think you should win it over Rudy Gobert? Like, that's a big discussion. I have a vote. Why should I vote for you? Stuff like that. We'll get into all of that, but just to give everybody the full rundown, we're going to start out with the Kevin O'Connor interview, and then basically we're going to get into some draft and free agency stuff, answer a couple questions, and then wrap things up. So, Ethan, anything to add before we jump into this thing?
No, sir. Let's get to it.
All righty. Well, with that being said, let's jump straight in to this Kevin O'Connor interview. So I'll read my 4 main takeaways that I wrote down, Ethan, and then you can kind of bounce your ideas off of them and then tell me some of your takeaways that are maybe different.
Let's do it.
First thing I'll start off with is at the end of the episode, Kevin kind of starts asking him, hey, like with how good you already are, there's a lot of discussion around the league. And there's also just like with the way that he's changing the game in a sense defensively, let's say. He's like, you're also changing, the Spurs, what's the word? I guess just the way that the Spurs have always operated. But regardless of the Spurs maybe making a flashy move or not this offseason, really what he's getting at is when you add a player like Victor Wembanyama, that completely throws a wrench in everything that you had planned prior. And we've talked about that. And so basically what he said is because of how good you are, do you think that that's impacting the timeline? Do you think that's accelerating, what the Spurs want to do? And he kind of did a two-way answer, I would say, Ethan, because it seemed like his answer was basically yes, but then he also says, I'm talking, I've been hit up by a lot of prospects. So he's not saying he's getting hit up by a lot of current NBA players per se, but he is saying that, they are trying to add, talent around him definitely faster. So I just thought that was an interesting kind of conversation and question there. It was, probably only like a 2-minute clip. But it really did, despite him saying prospects there, Ethan, it really did feel like they're alluding to the timeline accelerating. And when I say that, I'm not saying they're going to go and trade Devin and Keldon tomorrow to get Paul George or something. Like, I'm just throwing that out of thin air. Obviously, maybe that wouldn't work, but they're not going to go just, trade like some of their key pieces that they've been building, or like a Jeremy, for example, immediately just to go get another like current all-star or previous all-star level player.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I think from Wemby's answer, you could tell that he knows what he is, and I think he knew that before he even came to the league. And I know this is a long diatribe, Ethan. I'm going to get to, I swear. But now the Spurs know what he is, and that's kind of how we opened up the offseason and regular season preview that we did last episode. We opened up the show with that. Like, now we know kind of what the Spurs have in Victor, and have an idea of potentially, the directions that they could go. Um, I I don't think that it's going to. My takeaway from that clip was, I don't think it's going to be necessarily a super big splash move. And you've kind of talked about this, but at the same time, I think they are going to start making some moves to better the talent around him, or better the infrastructure, maybe is a better way to put it.
I would say that that's a definite. It kind of coincides with what recently came out in the anonymous players poll, where he was just narrowly beat out Nikola Jokic for player that most NBA players want to play with. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what he was saying in that interview. And I know he said the word prospects, but I think he kind of meant kind of like what you said, like NBA players too. Like he may have consciously chose that word to be safe, but it felt like he was talking about current players as well. Um, and my stance has been pretty consistent on this. I think what you just said is true. I don't know if it'll be a big splashy free agency play, like just to name a couple guys, Klay Thompson, Paul George. Like, those are great names. Like, they
Right.
fit probably with the Spurs and all this stuff. But I think it's more likely going to be just a real solid veteran piece that can elevate the maturity of the team, be a plug and play guy, develop some of our younger talent, and also elevate us to win some more games. I don't think that this is going to be a 39-year-old, PJ Tucker, who
Right.
like, I don't think that that's who I'm talking about. I don't want to grab a name because I don't want to be stuck to what I say here,
Right.
but just a real solid piece that can start or be a significant role player that elevates the rest of the guys and increases the competitive nature of some of these games.
Yeah, and not to harp on the same point that I've harped on before on this show, Ethan, but I'll go back to the Rockets solo post game that you did late in the year, where
Mhm.
they're just, and obviously Wemby had a little bit of an ankle injury. They even mentioned
Right.
that a little bit in the podcast. They talked about this game, not necessarily what we're about to get into, but I'm just remembering that as we're talking about it. Um, they clogged the paint so much and forced Trey Jones and Jeremy Sohan,
Mhm.
to make threes. You just want to have guys in those situations. They're not necessarily maybe going to be all stars, but not necessarily a Doug McDermott either. As much as we love our boy Doug, you want kind of two-way guys in that scenario where they're going to be able to knock down shots, but they're not going to be a liability on defense either. And that's really the definition of 3-and-D, which
Mhm.
is kind of maybe what you would want surrounded at those positions. But because the roster is so young as well, I think there's a lot of flexibility there. Like, it doesn't have to just be a 3-and-D player, but someone with those traits in their arsenal.
First name I think of, I know he's going to be a free agent. I don't know if it's unrestricted or not. I think it is uh, Contavious Caldwell Pope. And I know I've talked about him at length before, but I think he's a great guy that fits at that three spot to maybe take Julian's position and kind of elevate our maturity level, do everything that you just talked about. Not a big name, but definitely a piece that can help us in those situations.
Yeah, as much as people might be like, "Oh, it's just KCP." I mean, look what he did on the Lakers, and then look what he did on the Nuggets, and how integral he's been, and the
Hmm.
type of plays he's made in some of the stretch runs. I mean, look at the dunk he just had the other night. I mean, anyways, I
Hmm.
mean, the playoffs have been awesome. We haven't talked
They
about that.
really have, dude. They've been fantastic.
And honestly, as much as we want the Spurs to be there,
Hmm.
now that we have Victor, and this little side note here, and we're like, if we feel good, about the future of the franchise.
Oh yeah.
So it's been really nice. It's unlike last year where it's like, I'm just sitting here waiting until the lottery to see if we can potentially get this guy
Hmm.
to save our franchise, right? That's the way we're looking at it. Um,
Hmm.
This year we know we have him, and I can just sit back and just enjoy these playoffs because the Spurs aren't playing.
Right.
And so, yeah, I've been really enjoying like these first couple rounds, even more so than last year. And I think a little bit of that also has to do, not to go off on a playoffs tangent here, but I think a little bit of that has to do with kind of the coming out party, if you will, for the next generation of the league, whether that's Jokic, Anthony Edwards. I know the Magic are down 0-2, but the fact they're even in the playoffs,
Mm-hmm.
you see what
Dante DiVincenzo, baby.
I was about to say. You see what the Knicks are doing as well with with Julius Randle out. I could go on and on, but Wemby is a part of this new era that's being ushered into the NBA, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's another thing that interview was centered around in a lot of ways. Um, and man, one of the things probably that frustrated us this season is we wanted to see more of Wemby at times when it comes to that minutes restriction at the beginning of the year. And here's where I just want to, as much as Pop in the front office are worthy of criticism, 100%. This is the type of stuff where, like, even in the moment where Victor's frustrated, now that the season's over and he's sitting down talking to Kevin O'Connor, he can look back at the season from a 20,000 foot perspective. And he said, I trusted the minutes restriction. And as much as it was frustrating at times, I wouldn't have had it any other way because it helped my body adapt to the NBA in the way that it needs to for me to have the career that I want. Because it was as much as we've had the conversation of the Euro League being more physical whenever it comes to the rule set and
Mm-hmm.
things of that nature. The athlete in the NBA is a different caliber of physicality that he had to adjust to. And
Mm-hmm.
what was one of the biggest things that we didn't even really talk about this year, Ethan, going into last season? His longevity. We didn't think he was going to play as many games as he did. The trainer being brought on staff. Is there going to be an injury problem with his frame? The way that situation was handled, basically what I took away from the Kevin O'Connor interview is
Mm-hmm.
by doing that, they handled that exactly the way that they're supposed to. And I know that's easy for me to say as a Spurs fan, but when that's coming from Victor's mouth, and you remember when he was in press conferences expressing his frustration about it, and now
Mm-hmm.
he's like, I wouldn't have done it any other way, and I'm really glad we did that, as much as my competitiveness, was eating at me. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really telling whenever it just comes to, you know, and not to bring this up, but there have been, some little chirps and birds kind of since the Kawhi situation of, do the Spurs still have it? Does Pop still have it? And, I don't think super accredited people. Not saying necessarily us when I say that, but like the Brian Windhorsts or the Kevin O'Connors of the world, we're ever questioning Greg Popovich and the Spurs front office's motives and how they handle things. Look at Sam Presti. I mean, he's the
Mm-hmm.
example of the type of people that they build and how that's translated, into modern roster building. Um, but what I'm trying to get to here is they still know what they're doing whenever it comes to managing a superstar like this. And obviously, that's just the injury aspect, but I think it's telling to the rest of the way that they're managing him, which, not to just say everything that was said in this interview, but I'll finish this and then get your thoughts on this, Ethan, is he also talked about how there's mutual conversation between him and the front office, when it comes to decision making for the team. And I believe there was an article or report or something that came out before the season even ended talking about that. But still, to hear it from the horse's mouth in this interview, and I believe that was kind of right after he talked about teaming up with prospects or players,
Mm-hmm.
getting messages from them. Um, it's just another aspect of how a player like him is going to get some say. It's just like, as much as I could sit here and be like, oh, this La GM decision on the Lakers with Russell Westbrook, I didn't like. Those type of players, like a LeBron, like a Victor, they get a say in the front office, and the
Mm-hmm.
Spurs are managing that. And it seems like he's very satisfied with where he's at. But he's also like, yeah, I'm going to give him my input, but also like, he obviously has a lot of respect for them as well.
Yeah, a phrase he and Pop have used frequently in post game conferences. I don't think he used it in this Kevin O'Connor interview. Was, it's a partnership. Right. It's not a one-way street either way. Um, so it's reassuring that these conversations are going on, and for people that are going to say negative things about it because it's the new era of players, young players being entitled or whatever.
Right.
This has been going on forever. Like, I'm almost positive Tim Duncan had a say when free agency came around on who came around, who wasn't. Same with Manu, Tony. Like, this is how San Antonio has kind of always run. Is almost like a, no pun intended, a mom and pop sort of thing, where it's a constant conversation between the best players and Coach Popovich, RC Buford, et cetera, et cetera. So it's extremely reassuring. It shows the maturity level of him not to abuse this power that he has and to openly talk about it, but openly also kind of push it slightly down as if to say, like, I'm still the player. I love all the language that he used. I love his approach to these kind of questions. And I love what you said about, players maybe thinking after the Kawhi situation that Spurs front office, Spurs organization isn't the same as it used to be. But again, the player anonymous poll, who was the number one coach that everyone wants to play for? Coach Popovich. So clearly he still has a lot of pull with his legendary coaching status amongst the players, not even just his fellow coaches, but the players as well. So that shouldn't be a worry. And if you remove the Kawhi situation, and there's still a lot that no one knows, that no one will ever know about that situation just because of the nature of Spurs front office. But if you remove just that issue, it's been a perfectly clean record of how we treat our players, how our medical staff interacts with players, 100% class, et cetera, et cetera. So it speaks volumes that Wemby has had this kind of interaction thus far into his career. And it also speaks to his maturity that he's able to zoom out, like you said, and look at this from the 7'4" perspective. Once his competitive juices have kind of depleted because the season's over, and he's like, you know what, that was smart. I'm glad that we did that.
That I like the 7'4" view. That
You
was
like
really
that?
good there, Ethan. Okay, Alejandro Morales, one of our SSPN OGs, is in here. He says Spoelstra Pop was second. I believe he was first last year. I might be wrong. I had a friend send me the poll recently. Okay, it was Spoelstra this year, but
Darn.
Pop was second. And I'm sure if Alejandro is saying he was first last year, that's the case. And also the other thing I want to mention, it's Spoelstra at 20%, Pop at 18%, and then Steve Kerr at 9%. So there's a big drop
Big
off
gap.
after Spoelstra and Greg. And the other thing is, when I got that text from another friend of mine who's a reporter up at Missouri, actually, he was like, "This is pretty crazy, like considering there's been 5 years missed in the playoffs." But everybody understands the circumstances in the situation. That's kind of happened. And this is kind of showing that people in the NBA know that. And I think when you add Victor to the roster, that probably increases the amount of votes for Pop too,
Oh, for sure. And if you want to say that the Spurs were in a bad situation after Kawhi for however many years, like, sure. But he also, not to rehash bad blood, but Kawhi left us kind of in a really bad situation in terms of rebuilding or staying competitive. Like, we were right in the middle of like which direction to go. So I don't blame the Spurs totally on how we played that out. And also, if you look at who we drafted, like, we drafted some good players. They just weren't like superstar players. DeJounte, Derek White, just to name a Lonnie Walker. Like, these are all like solid guys. They're just not like the number one option. Now we have Victor. If we brought those guys back, knock on wood, but maybe, it'd probably be a different situation.
Yeah, totally get what you're saying there. Getting to another aspect, I've really kind of got to most of my points on this Kevin O'Connor interview, but the last thing, and this is something I've also said before, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself.
No, you're fine.
But in this 50-minute interview, and I know there was the JJ Redick one before the season, and I had a very similar sentiment, but he's a year older, he's a year more experienced in the league. The way that he's wired, the between the ears, the way I wrote it down on my notes was philosophical mindset and maturity.
Yeah.
I don't mean this in a bad way, Ethan. I think he's just years ahead of his time, but I'm listening to this interview and I'm like, my guy is more mentally mature than me. Like, that's really what it feels like. And, that's probably what it takes to be someone of his caliber. at the level that he's at, he's definitely not just, you can tell he's not just, and this isn't just because we're Spurs fans. Like, everybody can tell this. I have friends that aren't Spurs fans that can tell this. He's not just a special basketball player. Like, he's a special human being. And he wants that for other people too. There was a point where Kevin O'Connor was referencing last year when he was on JJ Redick's show, and he said he was free in the universe. And then JJ was like, I wish I was free in the universe. And Wemby goes, you are. and Kevin O'Connor specifically hit on the you are part. Like, what did you mean by that? And he was just saying that he basically just said he believes like every human being has, the potential to do great things, and we just have to kind of hone that. And we have to he went on like a whole diatribe of like facing your trauma, like facing your fears. And he's like, I didn't even have that much trauma growing up. He's like, but things that happen to you as a kid, like it makes an imprint on you and you've got to face that. You can't, stuff it down. And for him to have that perspective on like emotional intelligence, like I'm listening to this and I'm like, you know what I mean? Like I've got this, not to go completely off topic here, Ethan, but I've got this genetics book for myself that I've had for like a year now. And it's called It Didn't Start With You. And it has a lot to do with like how your bloodline and your parents impact your life. Anyways, not to go into that whole and can influence who you are and how you react to things. So when Wemby's talking about that, I'm like recalling stuff in that book and I'm like, oh my gosh, and that's stuff like I just learned a couple years ago. And it's like almost reframed my perspective on a lot of things in life. That is not where I expected this podcast to go today, Ethan, but it's an example of how when I'm listening to him talk about this stuff, I'm like, wow, like there is some human intelligence in here that is very unique. That's what I'll say.
No, his personality is so extremely unique because, usually if a guy's outspoken, willing to talk to the media, kind of like he is, it's because of like a overconfidence, almost selfish way. Like it's never well read. It doesn't come across as like a well read person. But he's got like the Tim Duncan-esque calmness to him, but with the ability to speak his mind at 19. Or 20 now.
Yeah.
That's, like you said, so incredibly beyond his years. And I don't want to repeat everything that you just said, so I'll finish with this point. What I liked a lot about how he spoke was anytime he talked about the losing streak, the tough times last year, things that to improve on, his feelings about the team, it was always put in we, us, the team, everybody, his teammates. It was never like, me. It was always about how we can get better, how we can improve, how we struggled. And for someone that's English is his second language,
right?
That was big for me. As I say, for me, that is how he's thinking about the team and not just solely about his individual play.
I think that's a really good point because this is reminding me of another thing in that interview when he's like, when people tell you, and Kevin O'Connor was basically like, I think you can be the greatest player of all time, like to his face. And he's like, what goes through your mind? Like when people say that, and he just kind of he's like, not really much. He's like, it doesn't really it doesn't really affect me at all. He's like, and then he basically says, he's like, all my expectations are for myself are what I care about. And my expectations exceed what everybody's saying, basically by a lot.
Yeah,
is what he was saying. He didn't tell you exactly what those expectations were, but it was just like, dude. I've never for someone at his age with the amount of hype that he has, the amount of attention he's gotten, for him to have that perspective and the maturity, like I said, that's also a testament to his parents too. Seriously, shout out to them.
Yeah, it's the self-assurance. It's incredible at his age.
Any other final thoughts from this interview, Ethan?
Just gets me all the more excited for next year, Jude. All the more excited.
Oh, yes. It was a very good way to kind of get us into the offseason here as we inch closer to the draft lottery and then, of course, the draft. But here's the thing we can't forget, Ethan. I'm going to keep mentioning it. We got those Olympics this year, man. That's another thing that got me hyped for. They talked about the Olympics as well. They talked about him and Rudy getting to play together. I mean, that's going to be a defensive tandem. I know that
Mhm.
it's going to be tough for anybody to guard Team USA. And Germany's got some good players. They're coming off a FIBA Cup win. Canada is probably going to have
Canada.
the best team that they've had in a while with Shea Gilgeous, Jamal. There's other guys I'm forgetting. Lou
Lou
Dort,
Dort, Kelly
Kelly.
Olynyk,
There you go.
Dwight Powell.
That's the big one right there. That was
Oh, how could we forget the flagrant foul himself, Dylan Brooks?
Dylan Britt, RJ Barrett. See,
R.J.
look at all
Barrett.
the NBA players on Canada. Anyways, it's going to be a really fun Olympics. I'm super excited for that. And they touched on that as well. But because we're going to get like some NBA players playing in the summer, like that just hypes up the summer, even more.
Look at the comment there, July 26th.
He says, y'all fellas covering our Spurs players during the Olympics, because Jeremy will probably be in there as well. I think he's going to be a part of the FIBA Olympic qualifying tournament, because there's still some teams that need to earn some spots. But that's going to be the first week of July, and it'll lead into the Olympics. So yes, we will. And we need content too. And this is giving us more content. So we're very happy about that.
Mamu with Turkey. I don't know if they're qualifying either. I don't know where they are. Georgia, Turkey. Who's Turkey? Chetty.
See, it wasn't that far off. I don't know if Georgia's even in the qualifying
I have
tournament.
no idea. I just said his name because he's on our team.
But that is another potential Spur. Well, I guess he's technically
Maybe he is restricted.
Mm-hmm. But still another name to watch. And even if Mamu isn't a Spur, I would enjoy still watching him play for the Georgian national team. We love Mamu regardless.
Right on.
July 26th asked another question. He says, CD2? No, I don't think so. If he is on the French team, he's going to be like a reserve. Like, I'd be surprised if he plays. But I was looking at some of the rosters just from like past teams, and I don't know if he'll make it right now. Maybe, in the future, I think there will definitely be an Olympics or a FIBA tournament where we see CD Sissoko and Victor Wembanyama both on the floor for France. But that might be like 2028.
Yeah. And just to say it, Georgia is playing in the qualifier July 2nd and 4th.
Thank you. There you go. Because maybe we can get a Georgia-Poland matchup and get Jeremy versus Mamu.
Would be crazy.
And to see Victor in the Olympic rule set as well will be very fun. I have a feeling I just want to get Team USA versus France, even if it's not even if it's in just one of the first games. I want to see Team USA try to score on Rudy and Victor with the Olympic rule set. I just think that would be such an intriguing thing to watch.
1,000%.
But now that we are off of our Olympics rant, we are going to get to another big topic this offseason, and that is, of course, the NBA draft. Ethan, I'm not sure how I want to start this, but I guess what I wrote it down in our notes was Jude's dream draft scenario. So I guess I'll just jump into it like that. So in the last episode, you guys saw the clip that we talked about. We did 30 minutes going through the big board. We've been looking at some prospects here and there throughout the season. Obviously, we were much more focused on the actual Spurs, but still, I've been watching some highlights, just been, keeping my ears plugged to like, okay, who are like the main guys that are being talked about or whatever. So I say all of that to say that I've kind of started to draw some conclusions now on maybe some potential guys that are my favorites going into the draft. There's still some time. Obviously, we got until June. There's a lot that's going to play out. But as we inch toward the draft lottery here, I am starting to get an idea of some guys that I like. And so the thing about this dream scenario is it's a dream scenario for a reason, because the first thing is we're going to have both picks for my dream scenario to happen. So already we're going to have some lottery luck. And then on top of that, after the lottery luck, we're going to have to hope that both of these players are still there when we pick. One I feel pretty confident in, but the other, and this may give away who it is, but there's some places that have rated him in the low top 10, and then there's some places that have him like potentially going number 1. With all of that or at least top 3. With all that being said, I'm going to break the surprise. The first pick, if we get somewhere in the top 5, That's the other thing we're probably going to need. The first pick is probably going to need to at least be in the top 5. Nikola Topic is who I have really started to like and come around to, Ethan. And before we dive into him, I'll just finish up what this full dream draft scenario is. Later on in the draft, if we get the Toronto pick at 7 or below, Zakari Rissache, I watched the highlights today, so I know it's Rissache, falls to us down there. And that's basically, you've got your starting point guard and you've got your starting 3. Rissache is a sniper, 3-and-D sniper, but also watched a little bit of more of his tape today. Can go off the dribble, has some thunderous dunks, can play some good defense as well. But for the most part, a 3-and-D shooter, right? I think he can kind of come in and be Champagny, and obviously have a much higher ceiling. And then whenever it comes to Topic, not only is it his size at 6'6", we've seen so many point guards coming into the league kind of around that size now. Shai Gilgeous, not saying he's Shai Gilgeous, but that's just one that comes right off of mind, just to start. And we've seen, just more. Obviously, we saw the Jeremy Sohan experiment, even though it didn't work out. You guys get what I'm getting at here whenever it comes to taller guards. Luka Doncic is one, for example, and a lot of people have made similarities to their game. I don't think that they're the same player. I would probably say Topic is a little bit below Doncic, just to be completely honest, because obviously we're seeing what Luka is right now. But at the same time, I do see why there are similarities, and people make those, like saying there's shades of Luka in his game. And I think a lot of that does have to do with the height. That's why I brought that up. But more importantly, he looks like a bona fide shooter. He sees the floor. He can take people off the dribble. He can contort himself, whether he's trying to have a jelly layup or trying to make, a wraparound pass, under the basket. He can make cross court passes on the baseline. I could go on and on. Really, you guys, you just need to watch the highlights as well. But man, I've really come around on him, and I just think that the shooting, the playmaking, the size, as much as he's not the most athletic player of all time, I would still say the athleticism, driving towards the rim, the way he's able to finish through contact, and the speed he has as well, whether that's picking off passes or running in transition, and the way that he can reset a play by decelerating and then accelerate almost immediately after, on a guy off the dribble to kind of get him flat-footed a little bit. I think it would just there's so much when I watch the highlights, Ethan, and it's not just that he's Serbian and he's European, it's his play style. It just screams Spurs. And that's why I've become more why he's become honestly my favorite prospect for the Spurs this year. As of right now on April 24th. A lot of prospect profiles, a lot of scouting to go here, but as of right now on April 24th, he's become my guy that I would like to pick if we can get somewhere. And, maybe if you're number 1, it's a little bit different. But if we're up in that range, as of right now, he's my favorite guy that I've watched. And a lot of this does have to do with team needs, but I think his ceiling is solid as well.
I love the pick. My top 2 guys would be Topic and Rissache. And what's crazy is, depending on the mock draft you look at, they kind of go back and forth between who gets drafted first. It seems like you said, some guys have Rissache top 3, others have him like 8, 9, 10. And then Topic is kind of the same thing. A lot of people have him like at 4, 5, and then others have him at like 9, 10. So it'll be up to the Spurs if it goes the way you said, like, who do you take first? Because it'll really be like a toss-up, honestly. But just to speak about Topic, his comp on one of the mock drafts I was looking at was Goran Dragic. I think that's extremely fair. But he's Goran Dragic that's 6'6", and I would say has higher upside as a shooter, at least to start off. Dragic became a good shooter. He wasn't a great shooter when he came into the league. Another comparison that I was talking to you about earlier, and this one's kind of a blend. Okay, so I want you to think through this with me. Take Josh Giddey's kind of athleticism and size, but then add the erraticism and like raw finishing ability of a Manu Ginobili. I know he's like Manu's a
Ethan's
Hall of
not
Famer.
outrageous for saying this. Like I totally see your train of thought, and that's why if you go back to, not to interrupt you, but
No, go
if you
ahead.
go back to our last mock draft, the clip that we were talking about, the early Spurs draft prospects preview, Kevin O'Connor says he like jitterbugs around the court.
He does. And when you watch him, I mean, I get the Luka comparison too, because when you watch Luka, it's like, how is he doing this? Like, he's not doing it crazy fast. He's not doing anything crazy quick. It's just like he plays with such a high intelligence, gets to his spots, and can contort his body and finish at any angle with either hand. So that's what reminded me of Ginobili, especially when he comes off of high pick and rolls almost from half court at full
Yep.
speed, just downhill play. And he gets 17 points per game, I'm pretty sure, like 16 and a half. So he's going to help us score. But I think his number one strength, at least for us, is just being a natural high IQ playmaker. He's got
Yes.
some incredible passing ability. He sees the floor very well. He's best probably pushing the tempo, which is how we play. So that's great. But he also has the ability to slow it down in the half court, run pick and roll, say with Wembanyama, Jeremy Sohan, or whatever, and make plays for other guys because of the eyes of the back of his head. So I really like the pick. It also connects with the Spurs and the forward board players, et cetera, et cetera. But just to speak on Rasashe real quick, I think
Yes,
the
please.
3-and-D, ability at 6'7", 6'8". He's got a lot of raw ability as well. I think when he comes in and immediately is a starting small forward replacement for Julian without way higher upside. He can do what Julian's doing right now, which is play good defense, space the floor, move without the ball. I think he has higher upside than that. I think he can eventually take guys off the dribble. He's got nice athleticism, like you said. He's got the raw tools to kind of fill out his frame and be a nice, strong player. I think one of his comps is Harrison Barnes, who was like a 3-and-D player and now has kind of become an ISO scorer. For when the Kings need a basket, they give it to him and let him post up. Like, maybe he has that in his game down the road. Not something he's doing right now. But I think he also is a need for the Spurs that could immediately make an impact at that starting small forward spot.
Yeah, I like I think he has a higher ceiling than
Mhm.
potentially than Harrison Barnes, but I
Mhm.
see the shades of Harrison Barnes in his game. Like, I don't think that's a crazy comp, because there's a lot of kind of skills in that range that he does have. And he's also 6'9". So he's someone who can play that, he's more naturally a 3, but he's someone who can play the 4 as well, which is nice for versatility, brings some size, some length, all that stuff. And the other thing is, Victor did an interview praising him late in
Mhm.
the year. That's the other reason kind of why he's on there. But I also want to say that, as much as that's my dream draft scenario, that's what I am at right here on April 24th. Who are my 2 favorite players if we can get both picks and everything works out perfectly for us? It's kind of a lot of caveats.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I mean, I like a lot of players in the top 10 range. Basically, everybody we looked at. Like, I see some comments right now. People are talking about other people in the draft, like Sarr, Klingon, Rob Dillingham, Reed Shepard. I'm going to get to Reed Shepard in a second, because I have some retractions to make.
Mhm.
But going back to, I'm blanking. Ethan, remind me where we're at. I'm sorry.
You said that that's your dream scenario, but there are other players being mentioned in the comments that you need to allude to.
I would like most guys in the top 10. That's
Yeah.
basically what I was going to say. Like, for example, right here, July 26th says, what about a defensive big like Sarr, Klingon, maybe even Edie? I've kind of
Mhm.
talked about Edie. I'm not the highest on him, but like, if we draft Donovan Klingon or Alexander Sarr in the first, Alexandre, Sarr in the first round with our pick, like, I'm not trying to just sit here and be like, I'm gonna like whatever pick we make, but
Mhm.
we're in the top 10, and I trust the Spurs front office and scouting.
Right.
So I'm kind of like, I'm just so accustomed to growing up on being in the 20s or the teens. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So now that we're in the top 10, I'm not as critical as a lot of these players. I'm like, oh, all these guys are better than what we've got for most of my life. You know?
Mhm. Yeah, there's a situation for me that let's say we get the 9th pick or what 8th pick from Toronto, they drop or whatever, and we get the 5th pick, 6th pick of ours. If we get one of Topic, Rasashe, maybe maybe Reed Shepherd, like one of those guys and that first pick, and then everyone else that we've talked about is gone, I am fine with clinging. Like, I think that him as a backup center is a steal, honestly. Like, he could have the impact that Derek Lively has had for the Mavs for us in terms of just a real solid pick and roll defensive minded center coming off your bench, and you don't lose any size when Wemby sits down.
Yeah, we made the Walker Kessler I made the Walker Kessler comparison last time, but what you just said with Derek Lively, I think that's a great comp as well.
And then can I say my third guy just real quick?
Yes,
While I'm thinking about it, because I see Easy just mentioned him in the comments too.
Mm-hmm.
Dalton Connect, I think, might be my second favorite wing spot guy after Risache. I like him better than Matas Buzelis. I like him better than Ron Holland. Those are both really solid players, but Dalton Connect is 23, I think, or 22 or 23. So he already has the fundamentals. He has the physicality to play at this level. He's a plug-and-play guy, kind of like a Jaime Jaquez has been for Miami. And he is an absolute bucket getter at 6'7", 6'8" as well, with the frame of a really solid defender. He's not going to wow you with his athleticism in terms of defense, but he's still a really physical, solid body. And for a team like us that struggled with bench scoring, especially spacing the floor, like we have Keldon there as that kind of primary scorer, but when Malachi is not hitting threes, Zach's not hitting threes, like for Dalton to be that guy that can come in and just get buckets for us and space the floor, that would be huge, especially at that second pick if we are able to get it.
Yeah, I don't think that you're crazy on that. You know, I was looking into I did a deep dive on a lot of prospects today. Watching him really stood out. And that kind of do you want that to lead into our next little topic here that we have, Ethan?
You'll have to remind me what it is, but I like your flow, Jude. Let's do it.
Well, it's just Spurs potential draft prospects.
Yes.
And Dalton Connect leads the small forwards. So we'll talk about him before I read off the rest. But you kind of already said most of it. But I just think that really similar to Risache, he would come in and immediately be a 3-and-D guy. But he can get buckets off the dribble too. He was Tennessee's scorer. And the thing I like about him is his story too. He was at a junior college, worked his way up, then was at Northern Colorado, and I believe was a like all conference player in that smaller conference. Transferred this year to Tennessee, like, okay, this is going to be my year where I've been building up, you know, kind of like Derek White. And look at Derek White was 23 when he came out. Now we're going to get to Reed Shepherd because play style wise, I think that Derek White that's actually the better comp, I would say there. But in the sense that he had to work his way up from a junior college to another, you know, small mid-major school to finally making it to Tennessee, like Derek finally made it to Colorado, and then showing out being one of the best players in the SEC, leading Tennessee, you know, to almost beating Purdue, the national runner-up, that had one of the best defenses in the entirety of college basketball because of Zach Edey, which we all know, and as well as other players. Jaden Ivey went to Purdue, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't know why I'm bringing up Jaden Ivey. I think I'm thinking a little bit of the Jaden Ivey comment in the Kevin O'Connor interview where Wemby said that, you know, he was one of the more surprising players to guard. But what I'm getting at more is that Purdue is a really solid program and they've had good defense and produced NBA players, you know, for a little bit. And so there's a lot to like about Dalton Connect, and the statement that he made in 1 year. I mean, not only did that prove a lot of people wrong in the sense of what he could do at that level of college basketball, but it turned him into a top 10 prospect at 23.
Right. I'm a huge fan of him. Obviously.
Yeah. But I don't think that he has a higher floor than Buzelis and Holland. And I don't think that's all Buzelis and Holland's fault because we've talked about how G League Ignite literally got canceled this year because of the way that season went for them. But at the same time, straight up, I would say he is, while there's maybe a chance that like a Buzelis, because he's 6'10", if he can put everything together, he could maybe have, a higher ceiling than Connect. If you want to go to Ron Holland, maybe he's a little bit bigger. He's got a little bit even more, athleticism and physicality. But like shooting's a question for him. Shooting's not a question for Dalton Connect. I think he is much more of a sure thing than those two guys. So when you talked about how you have them, you have Connect above both of those guys, other than maybe Rasasher, or Rasashe, excuse me. I can see where you're coming from for sure.
Yeah, and it gives us a chance without having to make a trade or a free agency signing to kind of accelerate the timeline because he's still young. He's 23, but
Right.
he's, like we said, comes in with a higher floor, probably makes a more immediate impact that affects winning right out of the gate. Whereas some of these other guys, it might take them a year or two to really get comfortable and find their footing playing against NBA competition.
Well, I mean, I hate to keep bringing this up, but I'm pretty sure Ignite got I think they only got 2 wins this year. They got 3 at the most. So when you're talking about impacting winning, you're going to take the guy who elevated Tennessee. I don't know if they ended up winning the SEC championship this year, but regardless, I'm pretty sure out of all the SEC teams, they made it the furthest in March Madness, and he was by far one of the best players. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm losing.
No, you're good. You're good. I think we're going on a Reed Shepherd, right? You said you wanted to touch
I am
on
going to get
his.
to Reed Shepherd, but I wanted to read off some of the read off the rest of the small forwards list before we start. But this is the point I was getting to. When you talk about impacting winning, you've seen Dalton do that.
Yes, at the highest level.
Matas and Ron are going to have to learn a little bit because of the situation that Ignite was. And that's not their fault, but it also is what it is. That's what I was trying to say there. But just for the sake of the other 3 small forwards that I have on the list, because I have Dalton Connect, I have Zachary Rasashe, and then I have Matas Buzelis, Cody Williams from Colorado, who's Jalen Williams' little brother. Saw a comment about him too. I need to really watch more of him. I've watched bits and pieces. I like the flashes of playmaking that I've seen. And I definitely I see shades of J-Dub at 6'8" in him, and that's not just because he's his little brother. It's in play style as well, so there's definitely a lot of appeal there. But like I said, I need to dive into it more. And then Ron Holland. And so when I look at all of those guys, I would probably still have Zachary at number 1 just because of his size and maybe having a little bit of a potential of a higher ceiling than Dalton. And he's younger. Not saying by a ton, but just, with all the stuff I just mentioned. But I have Dalton over everybody else too, Ethan. Like if I had to rank those guys, like I said, I'd have Zachary at 1, Dalton at 2, and then I don't know exactly how I'd rank the rest. I'd probably go Buzelis, and then Ron Holland and Cody Williams, I need to watch a little bit more of them, but I'd probably have Buzelis over those guys, and then those guys rounding it out.
Yeah, for me, it's just about like what do the Spurs want to get out of this draft, and what we're talking about with these players and where they're slotted is like that second pick if we get it from Toronto. So our first pick should be a guy with high upside, like a Topic, Rob Dillingham if he's there, Rasashe. Right. But the second pick, I mean, we're at a place, and the rest of these prospects, none of them are really super jump off the screen. Like none of them have like ungodly potential, right? So for me personally, I'd pick for need and ability to make an impact quickly, and that's why I think Dalton Connect. And I think Cody Williams is a nice player. I like his defense, but maybe his offense leaves a little bit to be desired. But again, 18 years old, high upside, 6'9" frame. Same thing with Matas and Ron. It's just like, what are they going to be? They could be really solid players. I think Matas has a lot of potential in a lot of different areas. Ron Holland is really athletic. He's a great finisher. He's got a lot of potential as well. But in terms of that second pick, it's for me immediate impact on defense and or shooting if we can. And that's where Dalton Connect and Rasashe really come into play for me.
Yeah, and I like the point you hit on there of like what guys could be. Like if with that later pick, say Rasashe gets picked, right? Or even like I'm not gonna honestly, Ethan, from what I've seen from Dalton Connect, I mean I think just because of what Wemby said, I think the Spurs would take Versace, and I think they would probably see the higher ceiling. And because him and Dalton immediately coming in aren't that far off, although I would still say Dalton's probably a little bit ahead of him just because he's 23. I wouldn't be mad. Like, I genuinely would not be mad if the Spurs picked Connect over Versace from what I've seen, just because, I mean, like I said, I don't think that that's going to happen, but I get why you're high on him. That's what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate that.
Well, we are not just going to talk about wings today, Ethan. We're also going to talk about point guards. We already talked about Nikola Topic, who's my number one point guard. But there's another person that we need to talk about. We just mentioned a little bit earlier, who's been talked about in the comments, and who I talked about and had a very strong opinion on last episode. That has changed. I'm here to eat some crow on Reed Sheppard. And I will say, before I get into this, what's the word? I'm not I'm not as mad at myself about it after watching the highlights, because what I base my opinion off of, which, learning my lesson here, slap on the wrist, Jude. I watched the game where Kentucky got eliminated, where basically like nobody played well in March Madness. And then the other two games of Kentucky that I watched were both against LSU. Those of you guys who don't know, I'm a big LSU fan. When I watched the Reed Sheppard highlights, Ethan, there were like 3 to 4 plays from the LSU games, which tells me that was just a bad matchup. Like, LSU just had some good scheme against him, and he looked completely different in a lot of the other games. Now, I will say that where I talked about his athleticism, there is still a little bit of a question mark on that, but that's why his comp is Derek White, and I really like that comp. And the reason that I bring that up is you could say that Derek's a little bit more athletic than him, a little bit taller as well. But at the same time, the lack of athleticism, you could say, for Derek, for example, is made up for in his skills, his basketball IQ, and his hustle, right? As well as some other things. And those are all three things that Reed Sheppard has. So, I mean, first of all, he's a sniper, much more of a sniper than I thought he was. And if you have a lack of athleticism, I mean, think about how many guys are in the league, Ethan, just because they can shoot.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Love you, Doug. No hate. Love you, Doug. Love you so much. I'm glad you're getting playoff minutes also. Shout out to you. You're 1-1 against the Bucks right now. I'm happy that's happening for old Dougie. But that's an example that's one of the best ways that you can overcome like a lack of athleticism. But still, he played in the SEC and he went toe to toe with these guys. He's faster than I thought he was. He can shoot off the dribble as well as in catch and shoot situations. I know there were some comments last time, I believe, like disputing whether he's a point guard or a shooting guard. I just want to address this. The context of Kentucky is very important because I believe they brought in 4 to 5-star point guards, but I can only remember 3 of their names, so maybe it was just 3. But regardless, you're bringing in 4 to 5-star point guards in Rob Dillingham, DJ Wagner. Remember when DJ Wagner was at like the top of like all the drafts? That didn't happen this year because he didn't get that much playing time behind Rob Dillingham and Reed Sheppard. The point I'm getting at is not all 3 of those guys can't play point guard at the same time. On top of that, Reed is a little bit taller than Rob Dillingham, even though I would actually say that Rob Dillingham's play style is more akin to a 2, just whenever it comes to his skill set at this moment. And Reed probably has more playmaking skills because he's a little bit bigger and he's such a good shooter. They played him at the 2 a lot. But in his highlights, I would say the majority of it is him taking the ball up the floor. Sometimes it's him beating people off the dribble, but a lot of times it's acrobatic passes, very similar in the sense to Nikola in the way that he can contort himself around the rim and at the rim. I do think that he's not as athletic as Topic, which is why I still have Topic. Like, I think they're similar in a lot of ways, but I think the athleticism aspect, me personally, I have Topic ahead of him. And I think a little bit of that, Topic does kind of have an advantage just in the sense that he's 6'6", where Reed is 6'3". That can kind of help. But
Mhm.
I could talk about Reed's playmaking and his shooting and having some, he has, even if it's maybe not the most explosive bag, he has a bag.
Mhm.
Um, Here's the thing that really, like, there's that aspect of it. But the thing that really changed my mind on him, Ethan, was watching his defense. This dude hustles. I have
Mhm.
never seen more. And I feel like such a flip flopper right now because I'm changing my tone from last time. But
Mhm.
as I kind of started and told y'all, the 2 games that or the 3 games that I watched were definitely not the best. But I have never seen more. I don't even know how to describe them, but it's basically like diving contests midair where he ends up swatting a shot like almost late,
Mhm.
like because he times it like just perfectly to where it's like the shooter thinks they have space, so they're like in their release, but by the time they're in their release, then he's flying, like his hands, like his contest is like just coming into their view because he's like he's not necessarily close to the play, but he knows how to be just close enough to time these blocks on jumpers, dude. I mean,
Mhm.
there were some behind. How do I say this? Oh, there blocks from behind guys, but a lot of these were in front of dudes where he's just jumping at the last second and like getting a piece of the ball. I mean, just full effort. Like, and it wasn't just that. I mean, there were steals, but the majority of his defensive highlights are that. A lot of on ball harassing, if you will, I guess you could say, of
Mhm.
the person in front of him. Definitely never gives up on a play. And these blocks are almost like help defense sometimes, but it's also like sometimes he's just fooling the defender into taking a shot because he knows how to make the exact like jump and swat these guys like in midair. It was very eye opening. And here we go. Mezy's talking about it. Check how many jump shots Shepard blocked last year. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean it was the most amount of jump shots from a guard that I've seen blocked, like on a highlight tape, and this was like a significant portion of his highlights too. And it's just
Right.
over and over. Like, yeah, there's some steals and stuff in there, but it's mainly that. And I was just like, okay, wow, a lot of skills and a lot of traits that are also reminiscent of the Spurs.
Yeah, I think is a really solid player. I didn't watch a lot of his games live, so I don't really care for college basketball all that much. But I understand what you're saying about his highlights. This is defensive hustle. I get the Derek White comp and the intangibles therein. I think what scares a lot of people away from him is just his size and athleticism. Like, will everything translate to the NBA? So, like at his worst, I think he's a mixture of Kirk Heinrich defensively. And if y'all don't remember Kirk Heinrich, he was a
I do.
dog. Like not a lot of athleticism, but just a dog on defense. Like a modern day comp, maybe an Alex Caruso ish with just not as much size defensively, but offensively combine Kirk with I think a JJ Redick, and that's at his worst. That's saying like he's not going to put the ball on the floor. He's just going to be a
Like
floor
that doesn't
spacer.
translate. Yeah.
Yeah, like if all that doesn't translate, but what will translate, no doubt, is his shot. He's got a pure 3-point shot. So if you can just blend those two combinations together, I think he's a really solid piece for any team. The thing that scares me away from him is if we're going to take a guard with that top 5 pick, I'd rather have Topic or a guy that I think is going to have a higher upside just as an overall player that can have more
Yeah.
right? Like if you're drafting him, I don't mind drafting him, but to me, that's it. Let's say Topic gets taken, we can't get him, and we take Sachet with like the 5th overall pick, so we have a small forward.
Hmm.
Somehow we get the 7th pick and he drops to 7. I am completely fine with that
Me
because
too.
he's going to be a role playing guard, not a star, at least immediately. And at first, he's just going to play off ball and just shoot the crap out of it and make hustle plays. And that's all we can ask for him, ask from him, at least initially. I hope he has a higher upside than that, like just because I think he could break that mold of how people think of college players, especially at his size. Um, but it just makes me nervous, especially in that lottery area with who else is available to take him top 5, especially over a Topic.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was hitting on last time. Easy, I see earlier you asked what did you say about Shepard? And Ethan kind of described it just a little bit ago. I mainly I just wasn't sure from what I had seen in those 3 games, which were 3 of the worst games this season, as I learned watching the highlights with the lack of highlights against LSU. And that was kind of like, I'm watching this, I'm like, if he can't do this against LSU, but you can't base, a specific games, 3 games and make that, your full determination on the guy. But basically what I was saying is I wasn't sure how I have questions about his athleticism and if he's going to be able to do what he did in college in the NBA, essentially. That doesn't mean that he's not going to be able to do, certain things that he did. Like Ethan said, like, I think he's going to be a solid defender and a solid shooter, but is he going to look as fast in the NBA? Is he going to be able to close out on guys, as much the way that he was in college? Now that really does look like a skill, but there's some question marks that I have for sure. And I see what you're saying here too. Did Tyler Hero have great size? Another guard from Kentucky. What I would say about that is Tyler Hero's 6'5", and I think his athleticism jumped off the screen a little bit more when he was at Kentucky. But at the same time, the whole reason we're bringing this up, Ethan, is because I've completely changed my opinion on him, and I would be, like you said, later in the draft. I think early in the draft, there's some guys that I'd rather have. But at the same time, if like I said, I am not going to be upset if we pick him. And I think there are a lot of traits and skills that he has that will translate to the Spurs. And I think this is a great comment here from M. Easy. Pop in the Spurs front office would love Shepherd. I completely agree with that, with his personality. Both his parents played Division I basketball, and his dad won 2 championships at Kentucky. So you can tell he's loyal. You can tell that he's got a championship bloodline. We were just talking about how Wemby's parents had such a good impact on him. I'm sure that the Shepherds had a great impact on Reed. But with all that being said, I'm just basically saying, now that I've watched more of him, I have rescinded, I retract, I eat my crow, but I also realized that there are a lot of appealing aspects of Reed Shepherd on the Spurs, because you mentioned it, defense and three-point shooting, those are 2 things we need at the guard position. You see what I'm saying, Ethan? Even if the ceiling, like I said, I may like Topic's ceiling, I even might still like Rob Dillingham's ceiling a little bit more, and maybe that's because of the bias from those games that I watched, but at the same time, definitely do not feel the way that I felt last week about Reed Shepherd after digging into his tape this week.
I concur, Jude. I concur.
Our man Adrian Fabella in here. I've seen him have some Spanish comments before, Ethan, so I got to throw him in here. Hola, Ethan and Jude. Saludos de San Antonio. Me gusta mucho su podcast de los Spurs.
That's actually a friend of mine.
Really? Let's go.
Yeah.
I love it. Shout out to you, Adrian. I love the Spanish comments. We gotta have the San Antonio. We gotta have the culture flowing through. You know what I'm saying?
It's even better that he has a pink logo for his profile picture too.
Oh my gosh! Ethan, we went in that whole Reed Shepherd convo, and I forgot that we were listing off potential prospects, and this will kind of wrap up the episode. The others that I have at point guard, so we have Nikola Topic and Reed Shepherd. We've talked extensively about them. But the other 3 that I have here are Rob Dillingham, a teammate of Reed Shepherd, who is much more of an off-the-dribble, go-get-a-bucket scorer right now. And it was funny because like most of Reed Shepherd's assists in the highlights I watched today were to Rob Dillingham on jumpers. But great passes. But the other 2 names that I have here that maybe may not be as talked about, you remember Isaiah Collier? Remember when he was near the top of the...
Yeah, I remember when a lot of people had him at 1.
Yeah. So that's not the case anymore, but if I'm ranking my top 5 point guards, he is still in there. I need to go look into his tape later in the season to kind of see why he fell a little bit before I go off of, all the hype from earlier in the year, because that's mainly where my knowledge is. But here's a name, Ethan, and I'm really excited. I don't know why. I think it's just because I feel like his name is overlooked this year. Jacoby Walter, point guard from Baylor. You remember Keontae George?
I do.
Keontae George. Lots of shades of Keontae George in this game. He's a different player, but he is a sniper. He, I think, has a higher athletic upside than Reed Shepherd. Not saying he's going to be better than Reed Shepherd. I don't think he's as skilled as Reed Shepherd at the current moment, but 3-and-D has shown some playmaking flashes. The Spurs can hone that. And I believe he's around 6'5" as well. But really, he is just like he is an absolute sniper. That's the main thing that I notice whenever it comes to his tape. Maybe not as much off the dribble. He has shown a little bit of that ability. I probably need to go get a little bit of a refresher on his tape. But I remember a friend of mine who covers college basketball sent me some stuff about him earlier in the year, and I continued to watch him. And I believe, watch his midseason highlights and watched a couple games as well this year in the Big 12 at Baylor. And I think he's projected to go late lottery. I think he could be a steal. I don't know if we're even going to be in the range where we pick him because, like we just mentioned, we may have other guys ranked above him. But that's a name to watch that I think is going a little bit under talked about in this draft. I think if he puts everything together and can develop some skills, like really, he just needs to improve his playmaking. That's the main thing I see with him. I think he can end up being just one of the steals of this draft.
I don't know anything about him really, Jude, but with the same, I could do my research eventually, but just one question about him for you.
Yes.
With the same thought process that we had with Dalton Connect, as a guy that could at least come off the bench and get buckets, could that also apply to Jacoby Walter?
I would say for sure. But let me just check his age here because I'm pretty sure he's still a younger guy. Yeah, he's 19, but he's a Texas kid. Went to McKinney and then went to Link Academy, which is kind of like it's almost like a EYBL school. It's like Monteverde, where Cooper Flag and all them are at. But I think he could come in off the bench and score. But I don't know if I put this up earlier. But Victor says Jacoby Walter is definitely a 2-guard in my opinion, and he does have the size for that for sure. He says, but he is definitely fire. Victor, you may need to do the show for us. He says Jacoby Walter reminds me of Dante DiVincenzo of New York. Sorry for spelling. No worries.
That's a good comp.
That's a good comp. Yeah.
I like Dante DiVincenzo.
And he can put the ball on the floor. Like we saw it at Villanova too. I understand why he's saying he's a 2-guard. And I want to say he's at the least he's 6'4", but I think he's 6'5". So he definitely kind of is more naturally that. But I think, it's not like you want to force guys into that position, but I trust the Spurs to teach dudes how to become good passers. You know what I'm saying?
No, right. Yeah, absolutely. Do you know if, I don't know actually when this process begins, but has pre-draft workouts begun yet?
I don't think so. I think the combine is going to be like in the summer.
Oh, yeah. I'm so dumb.
No,
the draft lottery comes first, then all that begins. I'm dumb. I'm just saying, like, this could be like a name that the Spurs work out that gets you thinking. Like, usually there's always one or two guys like that are like a little later than we'd normally be picking, but still managed to get an invite. So,
yes. Well, Ethan, that is basically the end of our potential draft prospects. We do have potential point guards and wings in free agency. Do you want to bring up your spreadsheet that you had, and we can talk about that?
Absolutely. Let me do this.
I'm gonna be real with y'all. Not to what's the word? Not to damper the mood, but I texted Ethan this before we just earlier today when we were prepping for the show, and basically after I looked into free agency, I was much more excited about the draft. So this may not be as exciting, but I'm gonna go ahead and pull it up here, Ethan.
All right.
So, Ethan, you can just take us through your beautiful spreadsheet that you've made for us here.
Yeah, so I just kind of broke down the roster as of today, and then when everybody will either be unrestricted or restricted. The highlighted players here in purple are the two-way guys. So based on this, going into the offseason, we'll have 12 guys that are on guaranteed contracts. Plus, we have 2 restricted free agents this offseason in Sandro Mamukelashvili and Dominic Barlow. If we bring both of those guys back, that means 14 players plus these 3 two-way guys that we might bring back, and then that leaves room for one more guaranteed player. However, we could have up to 3 total picks come draft time, with the Toronto pick, our pick, and then the Lakers' second round pick that we also have, plus the free agency discussion that we have yet to get into.
Beautiful, Ethan. Thank you for setting the stage. One thing I will add, Jamari Booyah is for sure on a two-way next season.
Then I will add him to this.
But that's why it says RFA 2025. You got the right numbers.
Okay, no, I'm good. The numbers still add up. Then
because that's next year.
Potentially 2 of these guys will change, Raekwon Gray and David Duke, but maybe. Or is Raekwon Gray guaranteed because he's technically restricted?
I do not. If I would assume if you found that number that he is, and because he's a young player and we had him on the Austin Spurs before we signed him, I could totally see that. But I only officially saw that Jamari Booyah signed a 2-year two-way.
Okay, perfect. You know how these two-way guys always change up throughout the season and during the offseason.
Yeah. But do you want to jump in to the potential free agents that we had written down?
Sure. Do you want to pull that list up, or should we just go from the dome?
Oh, I thought you had that on here earlier when you showed me. Okay.
Well, I don't.
No, we're good because I have it on my I don't know why I thought that. I thought I saw that earlier. But because Ethan was showing me this before we were on stream, so I made that up in my head, y'all. But I have a list written down, so it's all good. Yeah, we'll just jump right into this. So at point guard, and there's 2 guys on this list that are still restricted also. So really, it's kind of slim pickings unless you want to start getting into like Monte Morris. Not to hate on Monte Morris, but like, is that really who the Spurs, are trying to? Is that going to fix their problems, or should we just play Blake Wesley at that point? You know what I mean?
No, totally.
So the first 2 names, and these are probably the only 2, like, if we're really going to sign somebody in free agency to try to improve the point guard spot, I think honestly these are the 2 most realistic names, and they're really the only 2 unrestricted starting caliber point guards that I saw doing my research. Markelle Fultz and Tyus Jones.
I would rather have Tyus of those 2.
Me too.
Personally. But also I don't know if I just got really close to the camera. I don't really know if I want either of them, and only because we have Trey, we have Blake Wesley, we'll probably draft a point guard, I'm guessing.
Right.
I don't know if it works out with a free agent point guard.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's why I opened this up by saying this isn't going to be as exciting, but just in the scenario that we do, like you said, you'd rather have Tyus Jones. I would agree with that. But, if we say we don't draft a point guard, and say, I don't know what the caveat would be here. Say we're moving Blake to the 2 permanently, just for total speculative talk here.
Okay.
And we signed Markelle Fultz. I'm not going to be mad at that. I know the shooting issue isn't fixed, but I think that he would come in and definitely help on defense, and would run the offense effectively. Like, I still think that would be. I say that, and I know he's played better, but now that I'm thinking about it, like, how much really is Markelle Fultz an upgrade over Trey Jones?
I mean, not a lot. I mean, Trey Jones is also
a little bit.
Yeah.
It's fair to say that. That's mainly what I was getting at. But still.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's why I'd be more. Sorry.
No, I think I'd rather go get Reggie Jackson.
The shooting would be more consistent. God bless Markelle Fultz. And hey, shout out to Markelle Fultz for like making an NBA career after we all felt like he was done for. Shout out to him being in the playoffs right now. But yeah, Tyus Jones, out of those 2, I would for sure go with that. Here are some others. Okay, here's actually something that could maybe, these are pipe dreams. And this is also if we don't draft a point guard, which is probably most likely. But enough caveats. We've done those to start this segment. Tyrese Maxey and Emmanuel Quickley are both restricted free agents this year. I really actually would not mind throwing a bag at Tyrese. Like throwing a giant bag at Tyrese. I actually wouldn't hate that.
I wouldn't hate that either. I think he's incredible. He just won Most Improved Player. The thing I think will get in our way is I think he'd rather stay in Philly. But I guess you never know, right? Because there is the whole Joel Embiid injury history. There's that we have to take into account.
Do you know where Tyrese is from?
Where's he from?
He's from Dallas. Does he want to come home? I know it's not Dallas.
Don't give me hope, Jude.
No, it really is the freaking Hawkeye gif from Endgame.
Don't give me hope.
That's how I feel too, because we shouldn't have hope for this because he's probably going to stay in Philly, and I wouldn't blame that at all. But if the Spurs were like, we're just going to offer the rest of our cap space to you because we can randomly and see if Philly answers,
they'd probably answer.
They would. I mean, look at it. You talked about Embiid's injury history. They want to keep Maxey. That's their next priority. He's 22. But for some reason, he's like, you know what? Joel's been getting a little injured. I could go back home. When he's 20, he matches up with my timeline a little bit more. But don't give me hope. That's my pipe dream.
And you know what?
Go ahead.
Come home, Tyrese. Come home. Let's make this happen. Let's get a billboard up. Let's make him force his way out of Philly.
Let me double check. I'm pretty sure he's from Dallas, but let me make sure I didn't just cap on here.
Let's pray for a Knicks sweep.
Okay, no. Born in Dallas, Texas, went to South Garland High School. Yes. Okay.
It's my dog right there. I'm in his hood.
There you go. Yeah, so I mean, and Quickly is just another name I threw on there because it's like maybe you could outbid Toronto, but do you really want to do that for Emmanuel Quickley? Probably not, especially if you can get a draft pick. And then the other name that I just have written down just for the sake of names is Malik Monk. I know he's a 2, but he's an unrestricted free agent, and I think he can handle the ball.
Dang. Malik Monk, huh? That's the name I've never even considered coming to San Antonio.
There's no smoke. Sorry, didn't interrupt you.
No. All I was going to say is he fixes the need for an explosive player off the bench. But that's, what happens to our rotation then? Because would he be the backup point in that situation? So it'd be him, Malachi, Keldon.
Yeah, maybe. It depends what we want to do with Blake. That's the other thing with that. But I was just looking at guards and like people like I know Malik's a 2, but he is somebody like who he can play point guard, even if it's not like his first position. He also has the size that kind of fits more into a point guard, but that's a whole nother discussion. The reason I bring him up is I was just looking at the top guards in free agency that were unrestricted, and he was literally the last name I could find to just round out and have 5 names to talk about. So I think, all your questions you just asked are completely valid. It's just if for some reason we decide to address this issue on the roster through free agency, that's a potential name.
If you could tell me that a trade was definite, I'd say absolutely sign him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's a move. Like if we got him, then we made some other trades that maybe got off of Devontae Graham, maybe a Malachi. I don't want to name a bunch of names, but I wouldn't be mad at that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to wrap this episode up here, this one isn't even the wings are not as enticing as the point guards. And as you can already tell, the point guards weren't super enticing unless it's just a pipe dream. But Kelly Oubre, that's actually someone I wouldn't mind. I think he would be a clear upgrade at the 3. And I know he took kind of that minimum this year to kind of bet on himself and has shown out in Philly. So that's really, I think, the most realistic. But to be honest with you, Ethan, Probably the next best thing is Shetty.
I noticed that too. I was looking at these free agents here, and I was like,
Oh,
Chetty Osman, bro.
like,
Well, like he sounded a lot better, but
oh,
I will
it's just so
say
funny.
my dude is there. I don't know if he's unrestricted or not, but Kentavious Caldwell Pope is there.
And I was looking at forwards on this, and I wasn't looking. He would be listed as a guard, but obviously KCP can play the three for sure. That's one that would be. I mean, I'm never gonna. From what I've seen from KCP over the past couple years in the playoffs and the regular season.
Oh wait, he's not available.
Oh, he's not.
Wait, how does this work?
I
I'm
think
literally on.
somebody else was talking about him being available in free agency. Let me see. Let me go look up
I was
Kentavious
looking
Caldwell
at.
Pope contract.
I think he's 25 unrestricted, unless maybe he's got like an option.
Let's see here. Okay, he's got a player option this offseason.
There you go.
So if he
That's
declines that, he'll be unrestricted. And that is 15 mil though. I feel like he's going to accept it. I don't know why he'd want to leave Denver unless he's just like, I'm gonna go get 20 million from somebody, which I guess could be us. But
Yeah.
I think probably stays another year in Denver.
DeAnthony Melton is another name I like at the small forward spot.
Victor's been talking about him.
And another guard that I forgot to mention, I don't think he's going to leave the team he's currently on, but Mike Conley, I wouldn't be mad at if we could get him on a cheaper deal. I know he'll probably want to win a ring, but it's a veteran point guard that could help develop everybody else. Kind of the same theory as Chris Paul, but with maybe less money that would have to be thrown toward him.
Yeah. When we get to start talking about the older point guards, honestly, that just makes me want to draft one more.
Right. I understand that.
But for this conversation, like I understand why you're bringing him up. But the other threes that I had, Kelly Oubre, let me just read these off. Kelly Oubre, Shetty, even though shout out Shetty. Gordon Hayward, I mean, he's 34 now, and that's like is he going to be the backup through the starter? But this is just a potential name. Najee Marshall
I like Najee Marshall.
I like Najee Marshall too from the Pelicans. But still, it's like Najee Marshall was a third stringer on the Pelicans until they just had an injury recently. You know what I'm saying? Not to say that Najee Marshall's not a solid player, but he's more of a depth guy. And then the last thing I have written down, and this is the only reason I wrote this down, is because I literally couldn't find like after Najee Marshall, there's not really anybody who's had much playing time in free agency, and that's Klay Thompson. And that's just because he could play the three and we could offer him a bunch of money and he would help our shooting issue. I don't know if 34-year-old Klay Thompson would help our defensive issue. But if I have to name 5 threes that could potentially be signed by the Spurs and fit on the roster, that's what I came up with.
In a 2K situation, it's perfect.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? But I don't think he would want to come to San Antonio, to be completely honest. I think if it came down to it, if he was leaving the Warriors, I think there are 2 teams that could offer him some money that he would rather go to, and that's the Dallas Mavericks.
Okay.
And the New York Knicks.
I could see that.
I think both of those teams could really use him as just strictly a 3, maybe half a D player.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I can see that for sure. And I was texting you. I've seen some rumors. There was a report a couple weeks ago about how the Magic and him potentially have a lot of mutual interest. And you look at how their 3-point shooting's gone in these first 2 games of the playoffs. It's been really rough. So he would come in and immediately, help with that. But the Mavs and the Knicks, I think, are, 2 solid teams too. The Spurs are not where they're not close enough to competing for, I think, Klay to consider that.
Right. Even if we went out and got every possible great thing available to us, we still wouldn't be contenders.
Right.
It just wouldn't happen.
It's just, we're still in year 2. But I think, Ethan, and I actually, I know it's April, and I know last year we got some things wrong in our season's predictions. But I think this year will be better than last year, or the 2025-26 season, or excuse me, 2024-25 season will be much better than the 2023-24 season. I don't know if the Spurs will get to the play-in, but I think they'll be much closer to that.
I would agree with that statement.
I have to say, before we wrap this up, I just love this name, Wadabeezy 88. And you've got the 88 Whataburger waiting slip. I don't even know what you should call it. I have one that says class of 18. But anyways, shout out to you, Wadabeezy. Wadabeezy says Buzelis has great mid-range and a great shot blocker.
I just love the way you kept saying his name.
It's no, well, dude, that's what I call Whataburger. I call it Wadabeezy, and I'll call it that with my friends a lot. So at first when I saw that, I was like, is this somebody I know? But then I was like, I don't think it is. But shout out to you for also having that same name for Whataburger.
Heck yeah. Love it. Whatabeezy in the comments. Thanks for being here.
Heck yeah. Okay. Well, Ethan.
Look at July's comment. It's coming.
Patiently waiting for the return of Ethan's mustache.
It's coming, baby. Summertime. Short King summer. Ride that stash.
Wadabeezy says, here in SA, baby. Shout out. A real one from the Tone, Ethan.
From the 210?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm from the 830, so I can't even claim the 210.
That's right. I forget about that. So Bernie's a little bit outside. It changes the area code.
Yes, just on the outside ring.
Yeah. Sorry if I gave away too much intel saying that. I kind of just said it offhandedly. But
no, it's cool. I don't think anyone's gonna come track me down. I'm not even there right now. Like, I don't live there anymore. So
there you go. I was gonna say I feel like you might have talked about it before. Now that I think about it,
I think I have.
We've probably both talked about where we were from and how we became Spurs fans. It was just probably so long ago. Anyways,
you know what? Shout out to the one person out there that maybe has watched us since episode 1 of the trailer back in the day when there was no lighting in either of our rooms and we looked completely different. Have you watched that video in a while, Jude? Go back and look at it.
I need to, dude. There's been a couple times like it, because I know the set. Like, first of all, we're on Zoom, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're on Zoom.
Not to get nostalgic here, but yeah, we're on Zoom. So there's like the black, like it's like a widescreen. Like,
yeah.
But I remember, man, like before we got like the first video, the player breakdowns or position breakdowns that kind of got us some traction for the first time. They were like, it was around like 50, 60 views. So the OGs, like there was like even though it wasn't huge, and we're still not giant or anything, but like, just to see where we were. There were that consistent little 50 to 60 people that watched those first couple podcasts or so. If you're still here, go.
Weird claps for you guys. Palm claps.
Hey, but as much as we just reminisced on that for all of the new subscribers from our latest video and all of the OGs in here, we appreciate all of you guys. Thank you guys for helping us grow the channel and supporting us. And if you want to support the channel in another way, all you got to do is hit the like button and hit the subscribe button below. Really helps us out in the algorithm, helps us grow as a channel, and just get this thing pumping a little bit more as we continue to grow with the Spurs, Ethan.
Eventually, when they win a championship, we'll both be like buying houses with children and a wife. That's the ideal.
The timelines are gonna correlate.
That's right. We're on the same timeline.
They're gonna be parallel.
If they make a trade, one of us has to get a new job. We got to get promoted or something.
This offseason.
Yeah, this offseason.
When we make a big move, that's when our life changes too.
Right. I'm going to get abs. That's my goal.
Let's go. You're going to get there, Ethan.
Thanks, buddy.
If you guys want to continue to stay updated with the show, follow us on Twitter at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys. Thanks for hanging out with us for an hour and a half today. This is probably I didn't expect this one to go this long, but we just, kept diving deep there. But I think this is how a lot more of the off-season episodes might go, just because, first of all, I like what you're doing there, Ethan.
Thank you.
Just because there's a lot more to talk about now with Victor Wembanyama on the roster and being in the offseason.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Look at that. The mustache is already back a little bit.
I need to start doing that. I got to get some oils.
You got to go the full curl.
That's what I'm trying to do, but it's not staying.
Is that from a pirate? Is that
Captain Hook? I think is who you're thinking of.
Okay. Yeah.
Part of the crew, part of the ship.
Heck yeah. I don't know how to end this one. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us today. For real. We'll catch y'all in the next one. See y'all.